Phillip Bump is a national correspondent for the Washington Post. Phillip, always good to see you, and thanks for joining us today. Let's go ahead and start with health care. What's the idea behind the Trump administration sort of playing an outside game, hosting rallies in key districts and trying their best to deter those lawmakers who are opposing an Obamacare replacement plan?
Well, I think that Donald Trump, in part, wants to remind folks that he does have a big, boisterous core of support that he can energize by calling on them, by going out and holding these rallies. I think the problem, though, is in part that Trump's never done this before. I mean, he's used to being the leader of a business that can make decisions and have those decisions go into effect. This is the first time he's really had to try and build consensus around something, and I'm honestly not sure that they really know yet how to actually get that done. They're facing a lot of opposition despite what he tweeted. Sometimes his tweets are inaccurate. His tweet today was inaccurate. Despite what he tweeted, it's in bad shape. This package doesn't look like it's going to move forward, particularly on the Senate side. I'm not sure that these rallies with the existing core of support that Donald Trump has is going to push people over the top.
So what do you make of the Trump administration sort of holding this now bowling outing in their effort to sort of appeal to lawmakers who feel like they have been left out and their voices are not being heard?
Well, Donald Trump prides himself on being this deal maker, right? I mean, this was his sales pitch to the American people was, I can go in there and get these things done. The problem, of course, is that he's working with people who have their own constituencies, who have their own conflicting mandates, who have groups of Democrats that are in their districts who are not going to be happy about the repeal of Obamacare no matter what happens. I mean, if you look, for example, Jeff Flake, senator from Arizona, is going to be up in 2018. That's a key vote that Donald Trump's going to need, and Jeff Flake's not going to want to ruffle feathers before that election. I mean, there's all these ways in which the constituents that Donald Trump has to deal with now, these members of Congress, are very different than anyone who's had to deal with in the past.
And let's go to pay attention to the narrative. Some Republicans are saying, wait a minute, slow down. Let's take a pause, take a quick break for a second. How do you think it's going to be received in the Senate?
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem. There's already been a group of senators who have come out in opposition to particular aspects of this revised bill. The bill is moving very, very quickly. I mean, Sean Spicer, the press secretary for the White House, continues to insist they're not going to jam it down the throats the way the Democrats did. But the Democratic process that led to Obamacare lasted more than a year. I mean, Donald Trump's been in office for less than 2 months, and they're hoping to have this thing moved to the floor ASAP. That's been a challenge alone. I mean, Tom Cotton, senator from Arkansas, came out this morning and essentially said, hey, slow down. This thing's not going to pass the way it is. We need to revamp it. Donald Trump needs to be listening to those voices. And
we know about several groups, of course, the Freedom Caucus, and you talk about the Heritage Foundation. Of course, that group wanted Republicans to basically repeal Obamacare immediately after the inauguration without, any talking, any going through or coming up with a strategic plan to see where they could get to. Should that relationship become further strained, how do you think that will work?
Well, Donald Trump's always had sort of a strained relationship with core conservative groups, right? He won election based on having none of these relationships with existing constituencies. A lot of folks came on board toward the end once it became clear he was going to be the nominee. But he doesn't have long-lasting relationships with these folks. That's one problem. The other problem he has is that there are all these groups like the AARP and the American Medical Association who are coming out against the legislation. So it's hard because conservatives are telling him they don't like it, mainstream organizations are telling him they don't like it, and Democrats are broadly opposed to it. There's not a lot of space for Donald Trump to be able to build a coalition around this legislation. And again, it's just not something he's used to having to do.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about the president's wiretap claims. Where does the investigation stand right now? What's the latest?
So it's sort of hard to say, but the fact that there is this push for an investigation is fairly remarkable. I mean, Sean Spicer was asked about this today and sort of deferred to some extent on it. But the fact that Donald Trump made this claim lacking evidence and now is looking for the evidence to back up the claim that he made is a fairly remarkable situation.
And that's sort of backwards. You're supposed to have the evidence first, right?
It's very backwards, and it reminds me to some extent of the voter fraud claims that Donald Trump made, where there was this massive voter fraud and then wanted to launch an investigation to prove it. I think part of the fact that he called for an investigation is rooted in the idea that he wants to sort of demonstrate that he really believes this is a real thing. So it's not just he made this thing up. He believes it so certainly that he's going to have an investigation the way he did with voter fraud. But I think that the odds are pretty good it dies on the vine.
And an investigation would be costly, right?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly wouldn't be free. I mean, it depends on what they actually do with the investigation. There have already been a lot of folks who've come out. The spokesman for Obama's administration came out. The former director of national intelligence, if I'm remembering correctly, came out. James Comey is reported to have wanted the Justice Department to say, hey, this didn't happen. There are all these indications that this never happened, and there's no evidence that it did happen. So I'm not sure that the government, beyond Donald Trump saying he wants an investigation, there are certainly ways that career bureaucrats know to sort of slow walk that and not put a lot of time into
Has
it.
to stop somewhere.
That's true.
All right, Phillip Bump, thank you and good to see you.
My pleasure.